Looking for this little plug, this little cord. I know. Is this what you're looking for?
Yeah. How do you know?
Well, because it was on here and, you know.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
All right. Let's see. Hey, somebody showed up. You sure are. Sure are. Sit anywhere you want. Okay. Well, it's 11 o'clock. So gosh, we'll finish that, and then that'll be all the material for your first exam, which, by the way, I know you guys are probably wondering when it's going to be. Well, nobody wants to have it this week because you're having your practicals, right? Well, next week's Mardi Gras, so you're off Tuesday, so we have to have it Thursday of next week. So whatever that date is. What's Thursday of next week? I already scheduled it on my courses. If you go look on there, you'll see it has the date on it, which should be the 18th. Today's the 9th. This Thursday of this week is the 11th. You're off the 16th, so 18th, February 18th is your first exam, okay? And it's just during the regular class time. You guys, Zoom like you normally Zoom. Although I have to remember, it has to be live video feed of you, so I have to be able to see you. And of course, you got to do your log on to my courses at 11 o'clock that day. And remember, starts at 11 o'clock sharp, and it's going to close at 11:50. Okay, so you only have 50 minutes to take it from 11:50 Thursday of next week. Okay, y'all got that? Anybody have any questions about it?
How many questions is it?
50 questions. 50 questions. Multiple choice, you know, and yeah, you just click on the exam at 11 o'clock. Not this Thursday, next Thursday. Okay, the Thursday after Mardi Gras. And you know, you see it's just like a multiple choice test, and then you submit it and everything. So most students finish in like 20 minutes. So 50 minutes is more than enough time. Okay, so any other questions about that? We'll finish. I have just a little bit of the skin stuff to do. You do the nails and the glands, and that's it. And then we can start actually material for your second exam, believe it or not, today, which would be the PowerPoint on the bones, I think. I'll start that one, I think, because yeah, we'll have plenty of time. Okay, well, let's get started. So let me change my display here. There we go. That looks better. So last time we finished up, I was telling you about the hair. It's an accessory organs of the or structures of the skin. And then your nails also fit in that category. What are your nails? Here I say protective covering on the ends of your digits. Well, I guess posterior to the digits on the back. They don't really cover up the ends of your digits. That's an important thing, because what nails are, they're actually modified claws. All vertebrates have some kind of claw in the end of their digits, but the nail, the human nail, or the primate nail, I should say, is modified in the sense that it's flat. And so it exposes the ends of the digits. And of course, that frees up the tactile surface of the ends of the digits. And of course, it allows you to feel things better with your fingers. And, you know, so you can use your fingers a lot better. And so you think about that, you know, humans use their fingers more than anything, you know, pick up things, can dial a phone, arts, crafts, just various skills you can use your fingers for. So the nails are pretty profound. If it's, like I said, facilitate picking up small objects, you can feel them better. Of course, you're increasing the tactile sensitivity at the end of your digits with no hard keratinized claw over the end. What are they? What are they made out of? Well, they consist of highly fused keratinocytes continuous with the cells of the skin, but they don't desquamate. A lot like the hair, except denser, just keratin. And of course, they don't shed. The keratin doesn't shed. Of course, it wears down. Of course, if you cut it, that's something different. But ordinarily, it would grow and then just wear down from use. Okay, so that's it. So what about regions of the nail, portions of the nail? The entire whole nail itself is called the nail plate. All right. Here you can see most of it exposed. Here's a sagittal section through a digit, so you can see part of the nail is exposed and part of it's underneath the skin, but the entire thing's the nail plate. The visible portion is the body. You can see the body of the nail, and then of course what's tucked up underneath the skin is the root. Okay, and so there you go. The nail bed, it's not really a part of the nail. It's actually a portion of the digit that's under the plate. And if you look carefully, you can see this tissue underneath the plate is you can see part of the epidermis underneath there. Right here, you can see the epidermis. You can see the stratum corneum, and then this red tissue underneath that would be the stratum malpighi. Remember the living layer? And if you notice, that's all you have in the nail bed is stratum malpighi only. Why is that? Why don't you have a superficial dead layer like the stratum corneum? Well, you don't need it. In lieu of a stratum corneum, you have the plate. So the plate is basically serves as the stratum corneum. Of course, it's much harder and fortified than just regular epidermis, but there it is. Okay, there's a nail matrix. The matrix is the proximal portion of the nail bed where nail formation begins. You know, it's way back here. You can kind of see where this nail kind of grows. It's kind of like the nail's version of the hair bulb, if you would. You can see a portion of the you see a portion of the matrix through the nail here, this kind of white structure, which is called the lanula. Sometimes spelled with an A, but traditionally it's just spelled with an E on the end, but just pronounced lanula, which means little moon. I guess it kind of looks like a little crescent-shaped moon. That's a portion of the matrix visible through the nail itself, okay? So there's that. And then that's it. That's all we have to say about the nails. Now we move on to the other accessory structures, the integumentary glands. And there's different types of integumentary glands. Here we begin with the sebaceous glands. These are what you commonly refer to as your oil glands. They produce an oily type of secretion called sebum. It's produced from holocrine type cells. Remember holocrine, a mode of secretion where the entire cell just kind of ruptures. And we had merocrine, holocrine, and apocrine. Well, these are holocrine cells, and you can see them here. Right here, they kind of looks like they're piggybacking on a hair follicle. Of course, this is a microscopic view of a section through the skin, and you can see the hair and a follicle, and then on the outside of the follicle, you have the sebaceous gland here, and it's kind of a lumpy looking structure. Those are the secretory cells, and it doesn't really have a duct per se, but it just kind of uses the follicle as its duct. Okay, so you usually see these, here I call them simple alveolar glands, associated with a hair follicle. And of course, the sebum itself is delivered into the follicle, and as the hair grows, of course, as it emerges from the skin, it's just pre-lubricated with this sebum. And of course, the hair itself it'll help wick the secretion onto the surface of the surrounding skin. And then the skin would also be lubricated with this sebum. And it's kind of like your body's built-in skin conditioning system, because what you have at the surface, that stratum corneum, and then the cells of the hair shaft itself, they're just dead keratinocytes. And so to keep them from being too dry and brittle and breaking, if your hair gets too dry, it'll break, snap off. You don't want that. Of course, if your skin is too dry, it'll crack and split, and you don't want that either. So it's kind of keeping it lubricated with this oily material helps condition the skin and the hair. So there you go. You do have sebaceous glands in areas where you don't have hair. You don't have to have hair to have sebum delivered to the skin surface. So the hairless areas of the bodies include the glands penis, the glands clitoris, or here I just say clitoris, but it's the glands clitoris, the part that's exposed. The foreskin, or the prepuce, and then the labia minora, which is hairless, but there's sebaceous glands there. And then the areola, which is the pigmented ring that surrounds your nipples. And some books, I think when we talk about the breast, I'll call this the Montgomery glands. And the Montgomery glands are actually a modified sebaceous gland to help keep the nipple and the areola lubricated. So there you go, sebum. Now there are some specialized sebaceous glands because they're modified for one reason or another. For example, tarsal glands, that's the, I guess, descriptive term, but the old school eponym is Meibomian glands. These are sebaceous glands on the margins of your eyelids, and the secretion, which is basically sebum, and oily secretion, helps lubricate the margins of the eyelids, and it also gets onto the surface of the eye and produces a monomolecular film over the surface of the eye, and then it helps retard the evaporation of the tears. So that's a nice thing. And then also another type of sebaceous gland are ceruminous glands, and ceruminous glands produce a product called cerumen, and cerumen is less. It's a lipid. You know, these are all lipids that are produced. It's less oily and waxy, you know, like at room temperature, it's like a wax. And so that's what you commonly refer to as earwax, because ceruminous glands only occur in your external auditory canal. So like from about your eardrum out, these glands are in your auditory canal, in your ear hole, right? And it produces earwax. You know, you don't have ceruminous glands anywhere else. So why do you have these specialized glands in your ear canals? Well, it helps keep that passageway clear. Believe it or not, it's kind of a tacky, sticky material, and some debris or bugs or whatever get in there, they'll get trapped. And the cerumen kind of acts like this slow moving glacier moving from the eardrum out to the lateral surface of your head, the opening, you know, to the outside. And as it's moving, it slowly oxidizes and becomes brittle and more granular. And then, of course, the idea is that it'll fall out, and whatever's dead or trapped in there will come out with it as well. Okay. So there you go. Those are your sebaceous glands, your modified sebaceous glands. Now, there's some other glands, a couple other different types of glands associated with your skin. For example, the sudoriferous glands. The word sudoriferous, word sudoriferous literally means to make an odor, or to be odoriferous, sudoriferous, to be smelling. And there's, of course, we're familiar with these. This is what you commonly refer to as your sweat glands. And a lot of times you don't really associate pleasant aromas with sweat, but there you go. And you have a couple of different types of sweat glands, but they're all basically built the same. Here I tell you that they are coiled tubular glands, which opened up to the skin via a pore or a hair follicle. Most of your sweat glands, however, have their own pore that opened up to the surface. The human integument is completely covered with sweat glands, except in the following areas. It's, you know, somebody mapped out all these areas where you have certain types of glands and you don't have glands. For example, these sweat glands, your lips, specifically the labial vermilion, the red part of your lips, like where you put your lipstick, no sweat glands. In your ear canal, the external auditory canal, where you have your ceruminous glands, well, you wouldn't want to mix ceruminous glands and sweat glands, so you don't have sweat glands in your ear canal. And then, of course, your nail bed, remember underneath your fingernails and toenails, you're not going to have sweat glands there. There's no pores there. You can't sweat through your fingernails and toenails. That doesn't make sense. And then glands, penis, and I would suspect the gland's clitoris doesn't have sweat glands on it either, but I don't know. Like I said, somebody mapped that out, and it makes sense. You're not going to sweat from the tip of your penis, right? You have sebaceous glands there. Now, like I said, there's a couple of different types of sweat glands. Here I define them as two functional types. First, the eccrine sweat glands. So now when you think of sweat glands and sweat, you said, you know, when you sweat, you know, you're working out or you're doing some strenuous activity, you break a sweat, right? Because you're getting hot. I'm all hot and sweaty, right? And so that's your normal kind of sweat glands, the ones you associated with being hot or whatever. I call those the eccrine sweat glands true sweat glands. They call it true sweat glands because they produce true sweat. You say, well, what's true sweat? Well, true sweat is 99.9% water, and it is produced and delivered to the surface of your skin as a thermoregulatory secretion, in the sense that it's delivered to the surface of your skin to help cool you off. Remember we talked about dermal capillaries and radiant heat loss and all that? You know, when you get your inner core gets too hot, blood is piped to the surface, to the dermal capillaries, and to help lose that inner core heat by radiant heat loss. Well, so you have a hot surface, and one way that you can cool off a hot surface is put water on it. And this is basically your body's attempt to help cool by evaporation. And then there's different types of heat transfer, you know, radiant heat loss, and there's heat conduction, heat convection, and then evaporation, evaporative heat loss. Because you know water, right? Everybody knows water occurs in three states. It's liquid, it's gas, and it's solid. You know, solid is ice, liquid is, you know, liquid water, and then as a gas, it's like steam. Well, it takes a lot of energy to go from one state to the next. Like, for example, if you put liquid water on your surface and to change it to a vapor, it requires a lot of heat energy. And so that's your body's mechanism to help cool. So it takes that heat that's invested in that liquid water. When it turns to steam, all that heat and energy goes into the atmosphere. Now, this works great on paper. All right, so yeah, you're hot, you just cool off with water, what you call sweat. Like I said, it's mostly water. There's no such thing as pure water in nature, you know, because as soon as water becomes liquid, things are going to disassociate in it. So if you analyze sweat or the constituents of sweat, there's going to be all kinds of garbage, you know, diluted in it. You know, various salts and minerals and urea and so forth. But anyway, it's close to being pure water. I said 99.9%. But when you put water on a surface, you know, it's going to want to enter into a vapor state when it's heated up. But the rate of evaporation is inversely proportional to relative humidity. You know what that means? The higher the humidity, the slower or lower the evaporation is going to be. So, for example, if you go out west where humidity is really dry, like New Mexico or Arizona or whatever, and the relative humidity is like always like less than 10% or something like that. You know, it could be 110 degrees in the shade, and you're like, hey, it's not so bad. I'm feeling fine. I'm not sweating at all. You see, I'm feel pretty dry. You don't realize it, but you're actually sweating buckets. You're literally sweating buckets because as soon as the sweat reaches your skin, it vaporizes. And when it vaporizes, it takes that body heat with it. So you're comfortable and it works great. But imagine the same scenario here living along the Gulf Coast where the humidity is almost always 100%. And so what happens in the same situation, doesn't even have to be that warm, you know, anything like above 77, 78 degrees with humidities over 80%, 90%, you're going to start feeling uncomfortable. You know, you're outside, you're getting kind of warm, then you start perspiring. and the perspiration collects on your skin, on your forehead, on your arms, you know, and you're like, okay, now I'm hot, but it just stays there. It doesn't go anywhere. So this mechanism is not working for you. So you're not cooling down by sweating. You're just getting wet and sweaty and you're gamey and you're uncomfortable. So they always say, you know, living in the South, it's not so much the heat as it is the humidity, right? Because it's the humidity that accounts for all the uncomfortableness during the summer, so to speak. So if you can control that humidity, then you'll be a lot more comfortable. As a matter of fact, that's what your air conditioner does in your house for the most part. Of course, it cools the air, but it also dries the air. So drier air is much more comfortable than your swampy air that you're accustomed to and living along the Gulf Coast. But anyway, there's your sweat glands, and that's what they're for. Like I said, it works great on paper. Like I said, the evaporative heat loss or evaporative water loss is inversely proportional to relative humidity. And there are some tribes of humans that live like in the tropical rainforest. They've been there for thousands of years, you know, and they've actually lost sweat glands. You know, they don't perspire anymore because it doesn't make any sense. So they live in the tropical jungle where it's 100% humidity all the time. And so it would not be to their advantage to sweat. So they don't sweat. They said they would have had a hard time living anywhere else. But anyway, that's that. So true sweat glands. What else? Oh, I'll let you know this too. I call them true sweat glands for true sweat because that's the thermoregulatory thing. But eccrine sweat glands or true sweat glands are also called miracrine sweat glands due to their mode of secretion. They actually deliver their secretion with 99.9% water by exocytosis. Remember the different types of functional types of secretory cells: apocrine, miracrine, holocrine. Okay, well these are miracrine opposed to the sebaceous glands, which were holocrine. All sweat glands are miracrine, okay, because most of their product is aqueous, you know, like your 99% water. Although this is kind of strange. The second type of sweat glands are called apocrine sweat glands, and then right off the bat, you probably assume, well, they must deliver their secretion via apocrine cells. Will the top of the cells pop off? Well, they actually don't. We'll see that these true are miracrine. This is just like an old verbiage that was used and just kind of sticks around. So it is kind of, it's a misnomer. You know, it was named inappropriately because they were wrong. These types of sweat glands are not apocrine, but they are sweat glands. But they're a different kind of sweat glands. And so here I tell you that what textbooks will call apocrine sweat glands, they're not really apocrine sweat glands. I like to call them false sweat glands because they're not true. Why are they not true? Well, they're false sweat glands because their secretion has nothing to do with thermal regulation. So it has no thermal regulatory value. So what's their secretion for? Well, it doesn't cool you down. Functionally, the secretion produced by your false sweat glands or apocrine sweat glands serve as scent glands in mature adults, or they are pheromone producing glands. The word pheromone just means a detectable odor. And animals produce pheromones to be detectable on purpose as a form of communication. And the key word here is mature adults. So subadults or juveniles or prepubescent individuals do not have functional apocrine sweat glands, okay? And the plot even thickens more if you look at this. Next thing I have to say, in humans, all mammals have these, but in humans, they're confined to the following area: the foreskin, the labia minora, the areola, it's the pigment arranges around your nipples, your axilla, your armpits, and your circumanal region. So look, these are kind of some strange, peculiar positions. Again, somebody mapped all these out. But if you think about what it is, these are all your adult smelly parts of your body. It's basically your crotch and your armpits. Okay, I know there's some other little places too on your chest and so forth, but it's basically your crotch and your armpits. And if you think about those areas, that's where you have, you know, pubic hair and armpit hair and that sort of thing. And that's all associated with these glands to help really deliver this pheromone. And so the hair that develops in these areas after puberty coincides with the functioning of these glands. And the whole idea is to produce this detectable odor. And why is that? Well, it's to communicate that you are a sexually mature adult. Makes sense, doesn't it? And, you know, well, of course, we don't, as modern human beings, we, you know, drive cars and go to college and have cell phones. We don't really rely on these primitive leftover animalistic features, you know. And so as a matter of fact, we do everything we can to prevent smelling like an adult. Well, some of us do anyway. Most Americans opt to do some manscaping or whatever and wear deodorant or some anti-funk spray or whatever you want to call. But not everybody's like that. But that's what it originally was, you know, is for. If you think like way back in primitive times, I mean, that's how individuals, you know, kind of, they relied more on their senses as far as communicating with individuals. Anyway, so your apocrine sweat glands. Now, and then here, this last little paragraph, again, I'm telling you about why they're called apocrine sweat glands. It was kind of well, when they were first discovered, the cells looked like they were apocrine. And so here I tell you, the mode of secretion was once believed to be apocrine, you know, when they includes part of the cell, the top part of the apex of the cell. But it's now known that they are, in fact, merocrine cells like they are in a regular true sweat gland. That apocrine appearance was an artifact of histological preparation. So when they were just, remember, I told you about the terms in vivo versus in vitro. So in the in vitro examination of these glands, they looked apocrine. You know. But we still call them apocrine sweat glands, I guess, until we come up with a better name, or like Mr. Williams calls them, false sweat glands. That sounds pretty good to me. That's it, the end. So we are done with everything for your first exam, which again, when is it? It's Thursday of next week, okay? The next Tuesday is Mardi Gras, so the Thursday after Mardi Gras is your test. So, does anybody have any questions? I got an auditorium that seats over 100, over 200 people in here, maybe 250, and I have one little lonely student in here. I thought I was gonna be here by myself, but she comes rolling in, and then attending Zoom this morning. Well, I have 38 students, so most of y'all are opting to, well, that's about half the class. So the other half of the class, I guess, is going to Zoom or view the recording, whatever. Probably, I don't know what you guys are doing. Starting Mardi Gras early, I guess. That's okay. It doesn't matter it doesn't matter to me if you view me live or view me recorded. That's all good. Just as long as you view me and you study your material, that's all good. So what I want to do now is close this. I don't want to save anything. I don't think I changed anything, did I? And I want to start your bones stuff. In here somewhere, I have go. Number 4, bone. Here it is. So your next test, your second test, is going to be over bone, skeleton, and muscle. These 3, 4, 5, and 6. Okay, that's your second test. Your first test is the 1, 2, 3 right here. So let's start the bone stuff. And so this should be somewhat fresh on your mind because we talked about connective tissues, right? And then we talked about bone was an organ and a connective tissue. But here I want to talk more about the organ bone. So here we go, osteology. Remember we defined it way back when we started the course, talking about anatomical terminology and all those ologies, the divisions of anatomy. And we said osteology was the study of the form and function of bone, B-O-N-E. Remember, bones, bones, it can be a connective tissue, but bone is also an organ. So here, the bones are the organs of the skeletal system. And before we get into the skeletal system, that's what I want to talk about, the organ first, okay? And so here I tell you, osseous connective tissue is the predominant tissue in the organ bone, but it's not the only tissue, okay? The tissue consists of cells, of course, those are the osteocytes, and also has proteins, and has a hard calcified intercellular matrix. And so that's kind of what makes up the connective tissue anyway. It's about the constituents of the matrix. It's unique. So what are the components? What makes it so unique? Well, first, you have organic components of the bony matrix, okay? And the organic components constitutes about 25% of the bone's mass. And so what is that? Well, the key word here is organic. And this word is used all kinds of ways in modern vernacular, I guess. But in science, organic only means one thing. Organic, have you heard of like organic chemistry? And there's organic chemistry, inorganic chemistry. And so organic, a lot of times people think organic, think, oh, it's natural or nature or whatever, that's a good thing. Let's, eat some granola bars and go ride a bicycle or something. I don't know. Organic refers to organic compounds. Okay, organic chemistry. Organic chemistry is the chemistry of carbon-based molecules. Okay, and we're concerned in biology with organic chemistry because we are a carbon-based life form. As a matter of fact, all life on the planet Earth is carbon-based, which a carbon molecule is, 1C. And the simplest forms of a carbon molecule is just like one carbon atom surrounded by 4 hydrogen atoms, which actually is there's a name, and that's methane. And then usually to form different components in a living organism, you have groups of organic compounds coming together. And there's 4 classes of organic compounds. And you'll learn a lot more about this in phys, I guess. But and we talk about them in here in passing, but there's carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. Those are the 4 classes of organic compounds, okay? And all living things have a combination of those, proteins and carbohydrates and so forth. So your bone matrix, a quarter of its mass is organic. And so what is the organic component? Well, protein. The protein collagen, remember we're familiar with collagen. We had collagen here and there forming all kinds of different things in the body. Remember I said collagen is probably the number 1 protein, structural protein in your body. Okay, so the protein collagen, it forms a specialized network of strong fibers in bone these collagen fibers are just referred to as osteocollagenous fibers, which is just a fancy word for the collagen fibers that are in bones, the osteocollagenous. And they form basically a network or a reticulum. Remember that word reticulum? Form a reticulum for that bony ossified matrix, okay? So 25% organic, and then of course, what else is there? Well, if you have organic, you probably have inorganic. And so what's inorganic? Well, inorganic is just like regular chemistry. Usually when you think about organic compounds or inorganic compounds, the compounds associated with minerals and salts and things like that, opposed to those carbon-based molecules. And so the inorganic components, mostly the inorganic salts, and the inorganic salts are responsible for the hardness and rigidity of bone. This is unique to this tissue because you don't have this anywhere else. The primary salts include calcium phosphate. About all the inorganic components, 85% of the inorganic components is calcium phosphate. And calcium phosphate is very, very, very common in the natural world. You can see it in almost all organisms. And as well as this one, the calcium carbonate. And it's about 10% of the inorganic component. Calcium carbonate is also very, very common in the natural world. And it's actually, we use calcium carbonate for all kinds of things, you know. If you're eating antacid, that's calcium carbonate. You got limestone in your driveway, that's calcium carbonate. You use chalk on the chalkboard, that's calcium carbonate. So you wait a minute. Limestone and shell and chalk, the same thing as Tums? Yes, it's all the same thing. So we use it for a lot of things. But right here, 95% of everything is either calcium phosphate or calcium carbonate. Everything else, the remaining 5% or whatever, is divvied up among what we call trace elements. So 5% or less includes calcium fluoride, magnesium fluoride, and that's it. Those two, calcium fluoride, magnesium fluoride, which is about 2 or 3% each. But if you look at a common compound, or a common element, I should say, within all of these compounds, you see calcium kind of sticks out. And everybody knows that calcium is an important element in bone, right? So, drink your milk, vitamin D, calcium, blah, 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 it's good for your bones. Yeah, it is, because we got your bones are mostly calcium. And then you also see fluoride, which when you think of fluoride, what do you normally think about? It's your teeth. That's good for your teeth. But now your teeth is something different. It's not really bone, but there's a lot of the ingredients in teeth are very common with bone. We'll talk about that later. So anyway, these are all your inorganic components. Now, if you add this up so far, you got 25%, 50%, that's 75%. So what's the remaining 25%? Well, the bone's mass, about a quarter of the remaining 25% would be water. And you say, gosh, that seems like a lot. Like 1/4 of your bone's mass is water. That's really not very much. If you think about of all your organs in your body, your bones are pretty dry compared to all your other ones. Like if you look at some other organ, like your liver or your heart or whatever, they're going to be up above 75, 80, and 90% water. So 25% is not very much, but anyway. So let's talk about why you have bones. Bones, the organs, okay? Well, we kind of touched on this in passing when we're talking about the connective tissue. We're talking about, obviously the skeleton, but there's other things too. We get into it a little bit more detail. The first thing I have listed is that and this is what you think of normally when you think of a skeleton, is that bone functions in support. It gives your body structure and form, enables the body to maintain an erect posture. You need a mineralized, hard, rigid skeleton to combat gravity. If you're not living in the water and have the buoyancy of water to support you, you need something to hold your body erect. You know, think about things that are boneless, like a jellyfish. That's my favorite example I always talk about. You know, you look at a jellyfish in the water. You know, you see a video of a jellyfish pulsating through the water. It looks so beautiful and graceful and everything, and it functions and it feeds and does its things. But you take a jellyfish out of the water and put it on the beach, what does it look like? It just looks like a big old blob of hawker or something, big old wad of snot, because it doesn't have a rigid skeleton support. In the water, it kind of has a skeleton. It's what we call a hydrostatic skeleton. It actually uses water, pressurized water, to give itself a skeleton. But outside of water, it can't do that. And so it's just like, bleh. And so you don't have, you have to have a structural skeleton made of this rigid bone. And the architecture of our bone is specific for being terrestrial on this planet. The density of your bone, et cetera, et cetera. I know this is an issue for, especially nowadays when we're talking about perhaps living in space or spending time in space. You're talking about people living on a space station. Now they're talking about, you know, building things on the moon and traveling to Mars and that sort of thing. Well, your density and the complexity of your bone is based on the gravity of this planet, okay? And so you have so much force being applied to your skeleton, and that's unique for this planet. So if you go to like the moon, I think the moon is like, its gravity is like 1/6 or something of what the Earth's gravity is. You ever seen like footage of the astronauts from the early 70s and 60s walking on the moon? I think they can just kind of jump real far. So there's no gravity holding them down. And so there's less force being applied to their body. So their body detects that. And so it invests less material in the bones. So their bones become less fortified. You know, they lose bone mass, you know, spending time in space and so forth. And what about if you went to a larger planet? Let's say that you could do this. You can't do this, but let's just say you could get in a special spaceship and travel to Jupiter, you know, the biggest planet, you know, of all the planets, the big planet, Jupiter. And let's say you could land on the planet and you can get out and walk around on the surface, you know. Could you do that? Well, not with the skeleton that you have, because as soon as you landed on Jupiter, first of all, you'd become flat. You'd be squished. There's so much force. There's so much gravity. It just flatten you out to the surface. There's no way that your skeleton would be strong enough to hold you up. Anyway, so support. That's why you need it. All right. What else? Well, support and protection. See, number 2, protection. How's protection? Well, here I'll tell you, protection houses and protects vital organs. For example, your skull protects your brain, the vertebrae, the spinal cord, and your ribs, your thoracic viscera, etc. Now, of course, you have all kinds of bones doing different things. Not every bone is for protection, like your humerus. Now, that's not protection. There's other functions too, you know. But I got to tell you, this function, protection, is probably number 1. Although I listed it number 2. I just kind of put this list together based on the book I was reading at the time. But now that more I think about it, is as far as the evolution of this tissue. I mean, there was a point in our geological history on this planet where, you know, there was no such thing as vertebrates, you know. And then when vertebrates first appeared in the fossil record, they were boneless. You know, there was no bone. This tissue didn't exist. But when this tissue first appeared, when your bone first appeared in the geological record, it always appeared on the anterior end of the animal. Now we're talking about creatures in the ocean, some fish-like things. And it was always in the head region. And that's where it appeared first. And then the head and the axial skeleton, and later when appendages and fins and so forth came, the tissue kind of segued out to there. But it was always in the anterior region. And so that bony armament, basically what it was there to protect the head. Why protect the head? Well, you think about what the head is. The head of the animal, that's where all your sensory things are, your eyes, your mouth, your nose, you know, all these things. And so that's the end that's going through the environment first. And of course, you need that to get resources. You need to get food, you know, protect yourself, find mates, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's selective advantages to preserving a protective tissue like this. And so that's where it evolved first in the head region. And then later say, hey, this is a good tissue. We can invest it in other areas for other things too, like support and so forth. Anyway, protection, that's a good thing. Now here's kind of a off the wall type of function you might not think about. We may have never heard of this before. Hemopoiesis, or sometimes spelled hematopoiesis, but the words mean the same. I think one of them is kind of an American, and another one's kind of a European kind of thing, like aluminium and aluminum kind of deal. I don't know, but hemopoiesis, hematopoiesis means the same thing. That refers to blood cell formation. Your bones as organs. Now there's other tissues in the bone, the organ, and so in the bone, you have red bone marrow, and red bone marrow is the hemopoietic tissue of your bone. This is where your blood cells come from. So hemopoiesis is blood cell formation. Of course, your bones are responsible for that. So that's where your blood cells come from, by way of the red bone marrow, okay? Number 4, storage. Your bones store stuff. What do? Well, a couple of different things I have listed here. First, your bones serve as an ion depot. Doesn't that sound like a cool place to go shopping? You get Home Depot, Office Depot, now you got Ion Depot. You go to Ion Depot to buy all your ions. What are ions? Well, you have different types of ions. You'll learn, in phys, you'll learn all about ions. You have positively charged ions or electrolytes, and negatively charged ions or electrolytes. The positively charged ones are called cations, and the negative ones are anions, and they do different things. And so the action of all these ions you'll learn about in physiology. They include calcium, potassium, sodium. This is sulfur, and then magnesium. And then there's a polyatomic ion called phosphorus, or phosphate, I should say. Phosphate includes phosphorus, with polyatomic plus oxygen. But anyway, all of these things are instrumental in physiological processes in your body. And they come from your bones. They're stored in your bones. And you have optimal levels of any of these in your circulatory system or and throughout your body at any one time. And to help keep optimal levels, these ions will be either stored or leached from, taken from the bone, or deposited in the bone. So there you go. And so when you need them, there they are. They're in your bone. It's kind of always reminds me of a funny story. I don't know if it's funny, but it's just a story that I usually share with this class when I'm talking about the ions and the ion depot. Your body maintains these levels of calcium and sodium and phosphorus and so forth. And you really can't really influence this unless you're malnourished or whatever. And but you'll see, especially nowadays, and there's all kinds of sports drinks out there. If there's I don't know what they're called. There's Gatorade and there's Powerade and there's this kind of aid, that kind of aid. And there you always see, people sweating and drinking these things, and they think they're replenishing their ions. And I've even read on some of the cans, and it says, contains electrolytes, and it says in carbohydrates, it says in parentheses, energy, and stuff like that. That's, you really can't, like I said, do anything to change your body chemistry, like I said, unless you're like malnutrition or something. My dad back in the 60s and 70s was the team, that he was the doctor, the team doctor for the Chicago Bears. We lived just south of Chicago in Indiana, and we had a small college campus, and then the Bears would use this campus during the summer as their training camp. And then since my dad was the county doctor, he was there, Doc Williams, so he'd help out with the football players and, reset dislocated this, that, and the other, and stitch people's, foreheads up and so forth like that. So he was for years, my dad was the team doctor. And one day, some professors from the University of Florida showed up, and they wanted to give the Chicago Bears this drink they developed. They figured that, well, this is a drink that we want to give to the professional athletes, and it was supposed to be just for professional athletes to help, maintain their hydrology, and so they can perform better, and so on and so forth. And my dad to give it to him and give him a report. And he said, well, okay, I'll do it. And so he fed it to him and everything, and they thought it was great and whatever. But on my dad's report, he said, this is a great little drink. The guys enjoy drinking it. I guess it's tasty or whatever. But it's no better than just regular old straight water. I would not recommend this over water, because when you're thirsty, you've been working out and sweating and whatever, you're thirsty because you need water. Okay, you don't need other implanted electrolytes, because that's not going to change your body's physiology. So he said, no, I would not recommend this. So he shot it. My dad shot it down. But these guys from the University of Florida, they weren't physiologists, they weren't scientists, they were marketing people. And so they go, well, okay, whatever you say, Mr. Williams, we're gonna, or Dr. Williams, we're gonna sell our stuff anyway. And you know what they called their drink that they sold? Yeah, that's Gatorade. That was the beginnings of Gatorade. University of Florida. That's what they call it, Gatorade, University of Florida. Yeah, true story. But and so anyway, the point is, you use these, but they're all they're stored in your bones, And like I said, unless you're malnutritioned and you need these, and your body's depleted of them, supplementing your diet would make a difference. Okay, so you store ions. You also store, fat. You say, oh my gosh, you got fat all over your body. Why would you need fat? Well, fat, remember, made out of adipocytes. Adipocytes store lipids. Lipids are an organic compound that you need for other things in your body. And so you have stored reserves that you use for different physiological activities. Now, this tissue that stores your lipid is what you call yellow bone marrow. So you have red bone marrow, it's the hematopoietic tissue, and then yellow bone marrow, which is the lipid material that's in your bone. And of course, it's a form of storage, okay? All right, anything else? Other functions? Yes, movement, obviously. Bone as a part of your skeleton, provides attachment sites for muscles, and of course allows for motility by forming articulations. Your muscles work on these bones to allow you to be motile. Know the difference between motility and mobility? Motility allows, like if you're motile, means you can move yourself. If you're mobile, it means you can be moved. You know, I'm motile, I can move myself. My can of water is mobile, I can move it, but it can't move by itself. It can be moved, it can't move by itself. Me, I guess I'm mobile and motile. Somebody can move me, but I can move myself. And so in order to be motile or have motility, you have to have something, tissues allowed to move yourself. That's what makes animals, right? Opposed to plants. That's where these terms originally came from. Animalia, which means animated, the living things on the planet are animated or they're not. They're stationary, they're planted, they're a plant. You know, this is early Aristotle terminology, but they're plant and animal. But of course, we have more than just plants and animals as far as we divide up the members of the living kingdoms and so forth. But anyway, that's real primitive. Anyway, so functions of bone. Now, structures of bone. Of course, you have 656 named bones. Did I say that? 600? No, not 656. 206. 206 named bones in the skeleton, or 212. It just depends how you're defining the skeleton. The human skeleton, how we're going to present it in this class anyway, 206. You go, how can you go from 206 to 212? Well, you're missing 6, and I will tell you about them, but not when we're necessarily talking about the human skeleton, because those other 6 bones that are missing, they're going to be associated with other discussions, and we'll talk about that later. Anyway, they're all different, you know, and to try to generalize them, it's not so easy to do, but to understand the components and structure of a generalized bone, we look at the structures of a typical long bone. And so here, structures of a bone, what we have in this example is a sectioned, this particular bone is a tibia. Your lower shin bone, this particular one is the right tibia. And so the fibula, is that correct? This is that's the right tibia, and the fibula would be located right here and so forth. And of course, this is a frontal section here and here, and of course, opened up and so forth. There's different parts of it. So all your long bones, we're going to classify bones too, have this basic components like this. For example, number one, a diaphysis. The word diaphysis means like to grow through, the growing part, the long part. It's what you see, this middle bracket. You see that? That's the shaft of the long bone, basically. It's composed of a hard, dense bone. You see right there? It's hard, dense. Appears very smooth and homogeneous. It's also known as compact bone. So your compact bone, homogeneous bone, dense bone, it's all the same thing, okay? And of course, you want it like that because most of your long bones like this have compressive strength. And so they're strong from end to end like that, you see. They're hollow. Typically the hollow portion is called the medullary cavity or the marrow cavity. And in there you contain, that's where you have your yellow bone marrow for the most part. Your yellow bone marrow occupies the medullary cavity or the marrow cavity, okay? So you have a diaphysis and then 2 epiphyses. You have a proximal and then a distal epiphysis, like the foot would be here, the knee would be up here, okay? See, this is proximal, this is distal. So proximal epiphysis, distal epiphysis. So what are they? Well, I tell you that they are the dilated extremities of the long bone that consist mostly of spongy bone. You see the consistency of this bone looks different than the compact bone. This is spongy bone. And like a sponge, you know, sponge has pores, little hollow little parts, okay? in the spongy bone, okay, that's where you're going to find your red bone marrow. Do I talk about that? I guess I didn't mention that there. But anyway, it's mostly spongy bone, but then there's a thin layer of a compact bone on the outside. Of course, it encloses it, protects it, okay? Now, so a diaphysis, two epiphyses, and then there's your articular cartilage. This is a completely different tissue altogether. Remember, articular just means at a joint. And of course, this is where this bone would form a joint with another bone up here and then down here. And so you can see that, you barely see this kind of light blue lining. That's the articular cartilage. And so I tell you, it's a thin layer of hyaline cartilage covering the epiphyses, provides a smooth, frictionless surface and cushions the ends of adjoining bones. And that's typically what articular cartilage does everywhere it occurs. It kind of cushions the ends of the bone because you would not want bone on bone, grinding. That'd be very painful because it's kind of soft, like a rubber bumper. I had to describe hyaline cartilage as like that. It's not mineralized, okay? Now, there are connective tissue membranes associated with bones. And again, we've kind of talked about these in passing when we were talking about the different types of tissues. Remember dense irregular connective tissue, I talked about that. There's periosteum, see that? Periosteum, which means surrounding the bone. All right, it's a fibrous connective tissue covering the entire outer portion of the bone, less in the articulating surfaces. So in other words, you don't have periosteum on the cartilage. Rather, it's there, but we don't call it periosteum on the cartilage. On the articular cartilage, the same tissue is called perichondrium. So you got periosteum, perichondrium on the outside of the bone. What does it do? Well, remember, it's a dense irregular connective tissue. It's very fibrous, collagen fibers, and you can kind of see it right here, kind of peeled away. It provides an attachment site for ligaments and tendons, because in ligaments and tendons, you're going to have the same kind of fibers. You're going to have collagen fibers and ligaments and tendons, and they blend and kind of intermesh and intermarry with the fibers that are on the periosteum or the perichondrium. So there you go. So you have periosteum on the outside, then you also have endosteum. See, endo means like inside, endosteum. It's lining the inner cavities of the bone, inside the bone, okay? But it's not fibrous and heavy duty, that kind of thing with the collagen fibers. Here I tell you the endosteum is a delicate inner lining of the medullary cavity and the spongy bone. So it's the spaces in the spongy bone are also lined with endosteum. What is it there? It's not structural. No, it's not structural. The endosteum contains osteoprogenitor cells and hematopoietic cells. And so the cells that are associated with forming the bone and maintaining the bone, those are the osteoprogenitor cells. And of course, the cells that are going to form the red bone marrow, that's the hematopoietic cells. And so they produce the red marrow and budding, you remember the osteoblasts, okay? Osteoprogenitor cells. So that's what it's associated with. Maintaining the bone, really. Okay. So that's gross anatomy of the bone. Now, microanatomy of compact bone, looking at this up close, looking at the details associated with that. Now, your compact bone is often referred to as lamellar bone. The word lamellar, like lamellae means plates, so lamellar has like little plates. And so lamellar bone, compact bone, same thing. It's composed of thin plates of osseous connective tissue. Those are the lamellae, and then you have different types of lamellae. You have concentric lamellae. Concentric means like it goes in a circle. You see that? Concentric lamellae form the structural units of the compact bone, which are called osteons. And so here's like one osteon, there's another osteon, there's another osteon, etc. They consist of these concentric lamellae that form like little rings. Here I tell you, they're less than 0.4 of a millimeter in diameter. They act as like small little weight-bearing pillars. Some older books might call osteons Haversian systems. Same thing, a Haversian system and an osteon, same thing, okay? The structures of the osteon include, first, the osteonic canal, or if you're a Haversian system type of person, you would call it a Haversian canal. So it doesn't matter, central canal, Haversian canal, osteonic canal, all the same thing. See this right down the center of each osteon, you have this hollow canal, the channel that runs the length of the osteon. And I tell you that they're longitudinal channels running through the center of each osteon. They may contain blood vessels, lymphatic vessels, and or nerves. And so they're there for a reason, that to accommodate one of these structures. And usually what happens is the structures are there first, and the bone actually forms around them. And that's how you end up with these round concentric lamellae. Other features associated with the osteodont include the lacunae. And we've talked about this before. Remember those little lakes? And you can see the little dark little pits everywhere. Each of those are to accommodate a bone cell. So here I tell you, small spaces or pits in the bony matrix between the lamellae, each contains an osteocyte, or a living adult bone cell. Now, remember, bone and cartilage both have lacunae, but only bone have caniculi. Here I have to tell you, caniculi, or singular caniculus, where a lacuna is a little lake, a caniculus is a little canal. These are the small channels radiating out from each lacuna. It transports nutrients and waste products between the osteocytes and the osteonic canal. So it's basically the osteocytes, I don't know what I'm saying, osteocytes. Sounds weird to me. It's their connection to the outside world, because they're trapped in this mineralized matrix. But so you have interstitial fluid that can flow between them, okay? Other structures, the perforating canals. So you have osteonic canals running the length of bone, basically right straight down through the osteons. Then these perpendicular ones, or some older books will call Volkmann's canals. Same thing, perforating canals, Volkmann's canals, see right here? Same thing. So I define them as perpendicular branches of the osteonic canals. They interconnect adjacent osteonic canals and serves as a route for blood to and from the bone cavities. Because you think, remember, the bone itself is hollow, right? And so you got to get in there. And so basically here's an opening to the outside of the bone. And so all the osteonic canals are interconnected, and they're interconnected by these horizontal little perpendicular branches. And those are the Volkmann's canals, or perforating canals, okay? There's that. Now, there are also, you've got osteons, the old compact bone, lamellar bone out here, and then you have non-osteonic structures of compact bone. Things that are not necessarily, it's compact bone, but not forming these nice, pretty little osteons. So those are non-osteonic structures. Well, you have interstitial lamellae. Lamellae, remember, is a plate, you know, thin plate. But the word interstitial means between, like an interstitial fluid between what? Well, it means, the word interstitial means like between tissues. Literally, that's what it means, between tissues. And so between structures, if you have some kind of fluid or structure or whatever, so you actually have interstitial lamellae, and it's compact bone that occurs between osteons. And if you think about it, you have to have something like that, because each one of these is like almost like a round little circle, little sphere, but there's no space between it, because if you put a bunch of circles together, they're not 100% space efficient. So you got a circle here, and a circle here. There's going to be a little gaps between these circles. Well, filling those gaps between the circles of the osteons, you got these interstitial lamellae filling those space. And so here I tell you that they're irregular fragments of lamellae between the osteons. They're the remnants of, they could be remnants of destroyed and or undifferentiated osteons. Like when the osteons are forming, they might not be forming a nice, pretty ring. They'll end up in forming these little spaces. So that's just what we call like this compact bone here and here and here and here between the osteon, interstitial lamellae, okay? Then you have circumferential lamellae. The word circumferential just means it goes all the way around. And so you have two sets of circumferential lamellae. Here on the inside, see that? Going all the way around here. And then on the outside, you see like three or four different layers of this stuff going way around the outside. Those are circumferential lamellae. The circumferential lamellae collectively, the ones on the inside and the outside together, add strength to the entire bone, provides resistance to torque. Okay, so the long bone becomes torque resistant. What does torque resistant mean? Well, the torque is like a twisting force. And so your long bone, it prevents it from being, if you applied force in opposite directions, like you grab it and twist it like this, I mean, you'd snap. But this helps prevent it, particularly if you have all these longitudinally arranged osteons and they're kind of held together. It kind of wraps them, holds them together. And so it allows them to be torque resistant, okay? Again, you got those on the inside, those on the outside, and we identify. So two types. The stuff that's on the inside, that's the endosteal lamellae surrounding the medullary cavity. So these on the inside are endosteal lamellae. And then the stuff on the outside, just underneath the periosteum, we call these periosteal lamellae, underneath the periosteum. Okay. And then spongy bone. Looking at the microanatomy of the spongy bone, or sometimes called cancellous bone, because it's this pattern of the kind of hatched kind of pattern, I guess, is cancellous. Okay, spongy bone, cancellous bone, same thing. Okay, it consists of irregularly arranged lamellae with osteocytes and lacunae. So far, it's the same, although spongy bone lacks osteons. So this is non-osteonic bone. So spongy bone, no osteons. You have lamellae and so forth, but you don't have osteons. Rather than have osteons, you have these little branching little structures which are called trabeculae, like little beams. And so you got trabeculae in spongy bones and osteons in compact bone. The trabeculae form a lattice work of trabecular cavities. So little spaces, little pores. Of course, there's nothing in these spaces, but if this was like living real bone, red bone marrow would be occupying these little trabecular cavities. So the trabecular cavities contain the hemopoietic tissue of the red bone marrow. That's why it's there, okay? The end. That's it. So that's our little bone intro. And what's today? Tuesday. Thursday, we'll actually start the skeleton and then get into our next body system, the skeletal system. And I'm just going to quit there. I know I've got 5 or 6 minutes, but I'll let y'all off the hook. Okay? And we will continue Thursday. Any questions? You all good? So hopefully you guys will be ready for your practical coming up. Okay, well, I will see you guys Thursday. I'll get out of here. Hmm? No, it's kind of short. Just a little